Welcome to Between Sundays. I'm Tyler, and I'm the Lord's servant. May everything you've said about me come true. Today, we're looking at Jesus through the eyes of his mother, but before we throw our own Hail Mary, now that there's a chasm growing between us, let's take a sword and pierce the very souls of our favorite co-hosts, Meredith Barry. Good day, guys.
Good day.
Good day.
Wow.
How you guys doing?
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, how are
Piercing
you?
your souls.
Feeling alive.
Yeah, you feeling alive?
Feeling good.
Guys, I think we have to acknowledge it now.
What's that?
For those of you watching on YouTube, you may or may not know, but this is literally, I don't know, our 8th episode back.
Sure, something
and
like that.
There has been nothing the same.
A new
There
setup
hasn't
every
been a
time.
single episode that is the exact same recording style as the prior episode. So we have different tables, or we have different setups, or there's different lights.
It's part of the charm.
Well, we're trying to figure
wall's
like
blue.
we're in a new space.
Yeah.
We're trying to get settled into like what's our long-term plan here.
No,
Yeah.
we just want to keep them guessing.
Yeah, like we had that little table for forever, and then Tim came last week.
And it was
And
way
I
too
was like,
small.
Yeah, that table was way too small to be on camera, and so now we have this giant.
We can fit every disciple
table,
at the
biggest
Last
table
Supper
you've ever
Yes.
seen.
at this table.
But it's perfect. I can fit everything I need right
One of
here.
these days, I want us to have bookshelves with a bunch
Yeah.
of little Easter eggs for
Yeah.
friends of the pod,
Gotta have it.
based on sound clips or things about grace.
Yeah,
like,
you reminded me right before we started recording that the very first sound clip I ever captured. Do you remember what it was? And I don't have it anymore.
The very
You
first
lost
Very
it.
first one.
squirrel noises?
Yes.
Yes!
Yeah.
It was me!
Yeah, the very first one. Marin, she's sitting here on the pod. She's like, "Oh, I love squirrel
I
noises."
do. I still do. It's like one of those
Yeah.
sounds of nature.
And
that's
it was
just
your
comforting.
go-to. It was your go-to sound
Yeah,
clip. Anytime
loved it.
I mentioned anything with my animals,
Yeah.
always.
Yeah. Now it's
Oh.
rabbits and camels.
It's
Yeah.
lost forever?
Yeah, I don't know where it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
So
real
sad.
tragedy.
Yeah. Guys, what's new? How you guys doing?
I'm okay. I'm all right. I'm very busy
Yeah?
these days. Yeah, I'm very busy.
Busy
And
wearing new Between Sundays swag.
I got the new shirt,
New swag.
new whatever this is called.
What is
sweatshirt.
what's the plan for this swag?
Well, it's
I
for
rece-
sale now at the
Is
Grace
it
merch
really?
store. Yeah.
I received an email saying, "Hey, you're getting a sweatshirt. Which one
Yeah.
do you want?" But like, I have no idea what the plan is.
Well, we got courtesy shirts,
Oh, did we?
but no one else.
as the hosts of the
Okay,
no, one
podcast.
else, no one else does.
I was like, so we're
Everyone
just
else got to pay for
we're
it.
just supposed
Friends
to
of
wear
the pod,
these
it
now?
is not
Yeah.
courtesy for you.
Yeah, maybe we'll get a bunch and give them away or something. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that'd be
they're for sale on our website right now.
We need to at least give one away to like longtime listeners, like best friends
Yeah.
of the pod.
Right.
Well, there's like a mini competition now. Now that I
Mhm.
mentioned last week, somebody came up to me and asked me a question or said, "Hey, I want you to do this on the pod or ask this question." Like 2 other people did that this past weekend.
Mm.
So now there's a little competition for let's see what we can get on the show. Yeah. All right. Sorry, I interrupted. What's
No,
new?
I'm fine. It's like boring. I'm just super busy. I'm working
Yeah.
a lot. There's so much to teach this year, and conversations to lead and all
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And I'm just like, I'm not like drowning, but I'm just every moment is kind of spoken for.
Yeah.
So when I can take a break and be with the animals or work on the shelves and stuff like that, it's great. But
We'll talk a little bit about that. So you said there's a lot to teach this year. Like, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, obviously there's always sermons and that just kind of is part of the job. But
Yeah.
we're also doing some classes this year. I'm teaching a class on Revelation in May. I'll be teaching a class on Isaiah in the fall. I'm going to be virtually redoing my Bible class for Bible skeptics in
Yeah.
like a new format, an online class format to try that out. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff. And I'm leading some significant conversations with the governing board that I'm working through. We've got our staff retreat this coming week,
Yeah.
this Thursday and Friday, and I'm leading
Yeah.
all of that. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of just like content prep, which
Yeah.
I love teaching. So it's good. But
Good.
yeah, it's just, that's all.
That is
Boring.
a lot. Yeah.
That's
Busy.
a ton.
Yeah. Marin, anything new with you?
Okay, I debated.
Oh, yeah. Great.
I debated whether or not I was going to tell this story on the pod, but
Tell
I
it.
will. I will do it, and then you
Yeah.
can always edit it out if you deem it,
We don't
in
do
any
that.
way inappropriate.
Oh, inappropriate.
It's not inappropriate. It's not. I had a great day yesterday. I got to host here at Grace,
Yes, you did.
and then I left the building and went straight to the grocery store. I went to the International Grocery Store down in Castleton.
Okay.
And I saw Grace family there. It's one of
And
those
they were
grocery.
having chicken for dinner tonight.
I don't think they were eating the chicken. They were right outside of the Korean corn dog stand where my daughter used to work. So they might have been having that. But it was just neat to go down and see a couple of Grace families in the grocery store, and they're eating lunch. And both of my adult kids were there with their friends, just party at the grocery store.
Hey, classic.
And
He partied hard.
I'm coming down the aisle, and I run into somebody who used to attend Grace many, many years ago.
Yeah.
And after exchanging, a couple of pleasantries and greeting, they asked if I was still at Grace. And I said, yeah. And then they said, which one? And they're like, oh, the real one. And I said, I wouldn't call it that. And they said, well, you split, right? And I said, no, we say launched. We say planted. But we wouldn't say split.
Yeah, we never use the word split.
And he said, I don't know what you call it when you divide plants in your garden, but I call it splitting. And I said, I call it flourishing, because now you got a plant growing here and a plant growing there.
It's called propagation.
And everybody gets to grow. So I just want to put it on record that I love Grace Fishers and the people of Grace Fishers. And it is a win for the kingdom of God that they are flourishing. And God is doing awesome stuff here. And we are flourishing.
Yeah.
I just need to set the record straight. I don't want none of y'all coming up to me in the grocery store talking about a split. That's not the truth at all.
Small but encouraging woohoo.
No, but it really was fun to run into so many Grace people all at the same time at the International Grocery Store of all places.
Yeah.
Where I bought amazing spices to make Indian curried cauliflower.
Plant-based life,
which I did, and then brought to our own Richard Mergulio this afternoon. And I said, I need you to taste this and tell me how to make it better. So I'm living my best life.
We'll keep everybody posted.
We'll just let them know.
Friends of the pod, I'm curious, for those of you who are very long-time listeners, how many of you expected that one day Marin would be the one going on and on about plant-based eating?
Not me.
And not me, right? I didn't see that coming. This was
did not see it coming.
I mean, I could tell you about the incredible chicken I grilled over the weekend, but the plant-based life.
She's still all about that occasional plant-based life.
The occasional. Oh, guys. All right. Here's the phase I'm in. And actually, here's the phase my wife and I are in, because I wasn't the one to do it this time, but we are in the phase of every weekend there's a different birthday party that our 6-year-old has been invited to that we have to take and mingle with practically strangers.
Yeah.
That's the phase we are in.
Yeah.
And so
they won't stay strangers for long.
Well,
you're going to know these parents real well in a couple of years.
Do I have to?
Yes.
Like that's
yes.
So
and then when your child graduates, you can choose to unknown them if they don't fit anymore.
But not till then.
It's just like every weekend for the next couple weekends. It's like, oh, it's Clayton's birthday, or it's Connor's birthday, or it's so and so's birthday, and someone, my wife or I, have to take Milo to the party.
Yeah. And then just like sit around and
sit
small
there
talk.
For every party is at least 2 hours.
Not to mention the buying of the gifts.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You need a whole nother budget line just for gifts for friends of your kid.
Yeah. So I'm glad we're talking about Mary today, because I was one of my questions was, do you think Mary had to take Jesus to a bunch of birthday parties? Because nobody could survive this. Nobody could.
You just need to have a really boring, dull anecdote that you tell every time so that people just don't want to talk to you.
Nobody wants to talk to me.
They just leave you alone.
Yeah. So I sit by myself. So that's the phase we're in. And if you guys have any tips on how to make it interesting, or how to... Here's what I think ought to be the case. And I said this to somebody not on the show, and they were like, you are insane. But I think you should not be able to have or be invited to birthday parties until you can drive.
No. No. That may be the most unfun, heartless thing you've ever said.
Oh my goodness.
Come on.
More heartless than
what is
what's the big idea between
birthday
graduation parties?
What?
You want to party? Earn it.
Yeah.
Earn it.
All right.
Grow
so
up.
here's the thinking is that if you need to go to a birthday party, you should be able to take yourself.
No. You're in the stage where you actually have to be there with them at the party, but that also changes. That changes.
Oh, yeah.
Eventually you
drop
get to
them off.
just drop
That's
them
right.
off.
Yeah.
Eventually you drop them off and you don't even have to pick them up until the next day.
Oh, sleepovers.
Wow.
Yes.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
When, when's that coming?
It's coming. You just be patient.
Yeah, because and again, my wife did it this past weekend, but I've done it. But it's every weekend is now spoken for, to some degree. Here's what we're doing at this time every Saturday.
You just gotta you just gotta start chatting about something. Just like kind of go through all the topics until you find one that you both share, and then just talk about that the rest of the time.
Yeah,
and maybe talk about a carpool. Maybe Connor's mom can come and pick Milo up, and you parents helping parents.
True.
That's what it's all about.
I haven't thought about that.
Got to get creative to avoid that.
But what
small
if then I'm I don't want to like be involved.
Do you want to be the pickup parent or the drop off parent?
Yeah. See.
Or maybe you take this party and then they take next weekend's party.
Yeah.
But
we'll figure this out.
Parents helping parents.
I'll keep you guys posted.
It takes a village, Tyler.
I'll keep you guys posted. All right. So we are in week 3 of our sermon series, Witness. The reason I remember it's week 3 because I have it written down.
Hey,
I
well
probably wouldn't have remembered, but week 3 of our sermon series, Witness. And Barry, you're back after being not the preacher for the past couple of weeks, but
right.
you're back.
Here I am.
And kind of share what the big idea was behind your sermon.
Yeah, this one I was really excited about this message. The whole series, in case you're just joining us, is basically we're looking at the person of Jesus through the lens or through the eyes of his followers. So kind of trying to see, are there new angles or perspectives that we can gain by seeing Jesus like in the way that he was understood and experienced by his people. And so this time we looked at a very unique person, follower of Jesus, who was his mom, Mary.
Blessed is your mother.
That's a good one. Yay. That's a really good one. Anyway, so basically, what I wanted to draw our attention to was the fact that Mary, as Jesus's mother, had both the most like intimate, personal, close relationship with him. I mean, she nursed him, she raised him, she was his mom, but she also, because of that closeness, had the biggest journey to walk of understanding his divinity or the otherness and the sort of strangeness that came as he stepped more and more into his mission. And I talked about it like a chasm that grew between them because this baby boy of hers became more and more incomprehensible to her. And yet, my big point was that she never fell away. She stayed with him to the end. In fact, she was one of the only people, one of his followers that was actually there at the cross as he was dying. She was there. And so that sort of image of this mother who had every reason to be completely baffled by what her son had become was the most faithful disciple of all in a way. And so that, I think, was a big model to us when it comes to our own faith, when it comes to even the idea of parenting adult children and all of that.
Yeah. So you started the sermon with the Hail Mary prayer.
Yeah.
Why did you feel like you wanted to do that, or what about that made it interesting to start that way?
Well, I started my message reflecting on the fact that Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox Christians elevate or venerate Mary to an extreme degree, like compared to us as Protestants. To us, she's basically a Christmas story or a Christmas character, and that's about it. We barely think about Mary. And so I just, that kind of got me thinking about like, all right, if Mary is such a significant part of many or most Christians' day-to-day experience of being Christian, and it's not like she's not anywhere in our day-to-day experience of being a Christian, I wonder if there's more to her story than we normally pay attention to. Yeah. So that, I just thought it would be interesting to draw people into that a little bit and say, is there more here for us to dig into? And I think hopefully after the message, people would say, oh yeah, there is. Yeah. She's actually pretty remarkable. Yeah. But I think maybe really, to answer your question directly, I'm in a season or a phase where I'm becoming increasingly aware of other church traditions, theological trends, patterns, even things like, I mentioned this in the app notes, but I didn't even realize that there was a much earlier, the schism between East and West, between the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church that happened in like 1054. Yeah, of course. I know you know about that. Yeah, that one. Anyway, there was a much earlier schism at the Council of Ephesus, and it was all about the identity of Mary. Was she Christotokos or Theotokos? Was she the Christ bearer or the God bearer? Who did she have in her womb? And the church actually split. Wow. And the Church of the East, which was Christians in Persia, they believed that she was Christotokos, because how could a human bear the fullness of God? Whereas the rest of the church, which includes everybody else, basically said, no, she did have the fully divine like Son of God in her womb. So anyway, all that to say, she's something people think about a lot. And I'm at the very least seeing invitations within the traditions of other aspects of Christianity for us to consider. Have we accepted an extremely limited perspective on some of these truths that God's Spirit is
like the pendulum swings so hard in one direction to kind of counter where we don't want to go, but then it's swung too far in that direction.
Yeah, right. And there's some things like with Protestantism, sola scriptura. That's one of the lessons of Protestantism, which is like only the Bible. That's where we get our information. That's where we get our truth. And as a Protestant, I'm like, yeah, heck yeah, I'm with you on that one. But then there's like, wait a second, but what about like church tradition and the Holy Spirit's, movement through the prophetic gifts in the church? Like, can we really say that the Bible's the only place that we can ever hear God's voice? No, it's the chief among them, but maybe there are other ways. And so anyway, all that to say, I'm intrigued while not like having in any way losing my Protestant, perspective. Yeah. I'm like, I do want to expand my thinking. So that's where it's all coming from.
Well, you mentioned Mary. You mentioned this sermon like 2 months ago.
Oh, because I preached about Simeon and his prophecy. Yeah.
And you were like, hey, come back in February because I'm going to be talking about Mary. So how long have you been preparing for this message, or was it just you knew vaguely you wanted to dive deeper into Mary, but it wasn't going to be for a while? Like take us a little bit through that process.
Yeah, back in the fall, I mentioned, I read a quote from a book, The Lord by Roberto Gardini, who's actually a Roman Catholic priest and theologian. And I've been reading this book about Jesus, and he has a chapter about Mary that I quoted from that I just found really compelling. And kind of it had a similar big idea to this message, which was about how remarkable of a woman and a model of faith she is. And I read that back in the fall, and I was like, ooh, one of these days I would love to preach about this. And then kind of just put it on the back burner until we realized that let's do this series about the disciples. And I was like, that's a perfect chance to do it. Okay. So, that's why.
Yeah. Okay.
So I wouldn't say I've been preparing for this for months and months, but I've been thinking about it since like last fall.
Mm-hmm. So you said you wonder if we may have missed something, or we don't get the full picture of Mary. What aspects of her faith and character do you feel like we've neglected, and how might we learn from her?
Well, this is kind of, we have to basically fill in some significant blanks because Scripture does not explicitly spell out a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at, like I already mentioned, the fact that she stuck with Jesus through everything, when you really think about what that everything was, it's pretty remarkable. The glimpses that we get of Mary, or even the moments where Jesus is speaking of his mother or of motherhood or whatever, you wonder what Mary must have been thinking and feeling and experiencing. And if you put them all together as a kind of a narrative and think about who she was, it's almost impossible to think of Mary as just being totally cool with everything and being like, oh, that's just Jesus. But like, I think she probably struggled. I mean, it would have been, it's not a leap to think of her really wrestling with a lot of this. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of her faith in the midst of the wrestling, her faith in the midst of the incomprehension. That's what I found so remarkable about her faith.
I love that you mentioned that moment at the wedding at Cana.
Yeah.
When she was like, look, they're running out of wine. And he's like, woman, my time is not yet
That's
come.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. When you mentioned that as the example, I was like, okay, when he did that and then, did the miracle, like what did Mary then say?
She said, mm-hmm.
No, there was no,
that's why it's not in the Bible. Because there's no Greek word for mm-hmm.
She's like, I told you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But we have no record of how she reacted when he did that.
Right.
But the fact, to me, what stood out was the fact that she knew he could do something about this.
Right.
Told me that she's known about him and what he was capable of and his divinity.
Come on, I've seen you do it before.
Yeah. But here's the thing though, and this is why I'm just so eager. I wish we could just get more details, because what she really says to him is, they're running out of wine or there's no
Yeah.
more wine. That's all she says.
Yeah.
Which if it was just that, then she's not thinking miracle at all, except for the fact that Jesus responds, "Woman, it's not
Mhm.
my time." Which suddenly it's like, oh, so Jesus heard what she said about there not being enough wine in relation to his
Yeah.
kingdom mission and the inauguration of the kingdom of God. So there was something else going on there between
Yeah.
the two of them. But the fact that he would say no says that, okay, they're not on the same page here.
Yeah.
She must have been thinking
Yeah.
this is the time, and he's saying it's not the time. But
Yeah.
then he goes ahead and he does it. So was she right? Like it's all, I don't know.
Yeah, because he's like, it's not my time. And she's like, hey, do whatever he says.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
she submitted to his judgment before his ministry ever began. She
Yeah.
submitted to his judgment.
That's a good way of putting
Yeah.
it. And then he goes ahead and does it. So
Yeah.
all I was trying to say is I don't know what, and I don't think anyone knows exactly what the dynamics were in that specific moment, but it's clear that at least in his response, they're not on the same page at that
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
You said the sword that would pierce Mary's soul could have been the hardship that she experienced much of her life, but you think it goes deeper. And so what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, I tried to capture as much as we know about Mary in the course of this conversation. And one of the things I pointed out was the fact that she did go through a lot of traumatic stuff. I mean, the flight to Egypt with her baby boy when Herod is murdering innocent children in Bethlehem, the poverty that they experienced, the whole baby in the manger thing, which is cute in a nativity scene, but like take a newborn baby and stick it in an animal's feed trough. Like that's awful. It's humiliating. The possibility that Joseph died early, we don't know, but it's a possibility. He doesn't show up again in the story. So if all of those things
And
point
there's
to
that whole virgin becoming pregnant thing.
yeah, and the social, and I didn't even think to talk about that. The social ostracization,
Mhm.
like, yeah, those are all that stuff. But many of those things are things shared by countless people in the ancient world. That's hardship. That's
Yeah.
just hardship in an ancient society, especially for a peasant. So none of that was unique to her, in my opinion. What was unique to her was that growing chasm that I mentioned earlier between this very human son that she has, who was also very divine.
Yeah.
And again, I wish we knew. We just have to piece it together. But did Jesus from childhood understand his divinity? Was it an awakening in some form for him? Those are all big questions, and we just don't know. But regardless, Mary did not fully grasp it, maybe ever, but at least until the resurrection, she did not fully understand.
Yeah.
And yet she had to watch her son go through these ordeals and these trials and ultimately his death, knowing full well that this is where things were heading because he won't stop doing things that keep poking the bear and keep talking bad about the religious leaders and all that stuff. She knew this was where things were headed. She was going to lose her son. And so in a way, I think that the ultimate death of her son on that cross and the full recognition that because of who he was, this was his destiny. And yet this is the child she would have given anything to protect. Like that to me is the sword that just splits her soul right in two.
Yeah.
So that's my take on it. I could be wrong. Simeon may have had something entirely else in mind. There's other references to the division that happens between people, this sort of like in Luke, in that prophecy between people who believe in Jesus and don't. It's kind of a theme in the Gospel of Luke. And so maybe that's the sword and maybe she made the right choice, but that I don't know. I think it has more to do with his identity and the recognition as his mom that her son was out of her hands and lost because of who he was.
All right, Maren, I got a question for you.
No. I've been kind of dreading this because I don't know that I'm not speaking for every mom, but there were elements of that message that were hard to hear because we cannot help but think
this
of
one
our own
should
kids,
be
especially
this one should be a layup.
our sons. This is a layup.
This is softball.
This is a layup.
Okay, please.
So,
Did you ever take your kids to birthday parties?
Has your son ever pierced your soul?
Has your
well, yeah.
yeah.
So when Jesus is young, they look for him for 3 days,
Yes.
right? And when they find him, he's like, I had to be in my father's house.
Yeah.
And again, we don't get the whole like, oh, okay, no, we're good. Like we don't get the reaction.
Yeah.
how would you have responded if you had to look for your child for 3 days and they're like, didn't you know I had to be with my father's house? Or like, would that have sufficed for you?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned that part of the story too. Doesn't it say at the end of that whole story that basically they were bewildered. They didn't understand.
They did not understand. That's right.
They didn't even get it
Yeah.
then.
Right.
I keep wondering at what point did she realize, oh, he really is the Son of God.
Yeah.
He's not mine.
Yeah.
Because even at that point, they didn't understand what he meant, saying,
Right.
didn't you know I'd be in my
Yeah,
father's
that's
house?
crazy.
That is crazy. And what would I have said or done?
Yeah.
Only Jaden knows that.
Okay, so you gave a couple examples of Jesus and Mary drifting apart. We talked about the wedding at Cana, saying that his disciples are his mother and his brothers.
Yeah.
On the cross when he tells John, here's your mother. Do we have any examples of Mary growing frustrated by the growing distance, or is this why she's revered? Like, because she remained surrendered and faithful through and through? Is there any example of her being like sad about that? Like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe so. Nothing explicit. It's all inference from
Yeah.
like what we must assume she must have been feeling. I mean, now that passage that we just talked about,
Mhm.
it says that they were
Terrified.
frantic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And her response, how could you do this to us?
Yeah.
That's different than just like, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
So there's some of that, but generally speaking, no. I mean, we don't, the whole your mother and brothers are outside and Jesus says, who's my mother? Who's my
Right.
brothers? Like, I would give anything to know what did she think when she heard him that he
Yeah.
said that. Did you hear what he just said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we don't have it. So that's the answer to your question is it's not there.
Yeah.
We have to just
Yeah.
infer.
Because I have to imagine she would, if she's bewildered at that age, I have to imagine there would have come a time where she's like internally frustrated by the continuing bewilderment, but we don't have record of it. How did Mary interact with and influence Jesus's ministry? How do you think she had any impact on that?
That's a really good question.
Thank you.
She at least inaugurated it at the wedding with the first miracle.
That's right.
Yeah.
She kicked it off,
Do
basically.
whatever he says.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, inference, but like you look at who she was, the person that she was when the angel shows up and says, you're going to bear the Messiah. And she says, I'm the Lord's servant.
Yeah.
You got to think someone with that level of surrender and trust would be a very a godly example for Jesus to look up to
Yeah.
see that. I mean, that's not just something some teenager made up on the spot. That's like a pretty fundamental posture.
Mhm.
And so it's one of the reasons she's so revered is because she responds in that way. In fact, she's so revered that in some traditions, she's even thought to have never sinned, that she was also sinless.
Yeah.
Because how could a sinful person bear the Son of God?
Sure.
And some traditions say she was a perpetual virgin. She never, ever had sex because that would be considered somehow, less than perfect and I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
So everybody has all these like ideas of who she was as a person. And so regardless, she was remarkable. She was his mom. I
Mhm.
think she influenced him a lot. And it would have been her responsibility to make sure, even as a tiny child, that he was learning Torah, that he was learning the songs and the poems of his people. Like that would have been her responsibility. So, I mean, to be the one who taught Jesus
Yeah.
the basics of
Yeah.
the Hebrew faith is a pretty big
Yeah.
responsibility.
I wonder if like she was present for some of those big moments like the Sermon on the Mount. And if she would have been able to put some of the puzzle pieces together in her mind. As you were giving this message, I kept looking back over Mary's song
Yeah.
in Luke chapter 1. And she says things like, he has sent the rich away empty.
Mm.
He's filled the hungry with good things. He's exalted the lowly. She would have heard him talking about those exact things in the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
And I wonder if she was like, yep, I knew he would do that. I
Yeah.
sang about that.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
She does seem to have an understanding of his purpose before she even gives birth to him. Just
Sure.
at the announcement of the news that she's carrying the Lord, she sings this song.
Right.
I mentioned last week that I started watching The Chosen, and the amount of other people who are watching or have watched The Chosen that told me this past weekend that they are also watching The Chosen. There's like it's a much larger group than I would have anticipated hearing about. But so I love one thing. I'm all caught up, by the way. I'm all caught
You're
up on The
watching like
Chosen.
season 4 now?
Well, that's it. It's currently in movie theaters, and I haven't gone to the theater to go see it. But
Gotcha.
I've finished season 3. But I love how The Chosen has chosen to. The Chosen is chosen. I love how The Chosen is chosen to portray the character of Mary. So obviously they're taking like creative inferences, or they're showing what could have been possible or plausible between the relationship between all of these people and Jesus. But small and subtle things, like he spends, I think it's in season 1, he spends an entire day baptizing and preaching to people, and he's exhausted. He comes back to camp with all of his disciples, and Mary's there, and he comes back and he's super tired and he doesn't want to talk. Mary gets up and goes to his tent and basically like is there to nurture him and listen to him or speak encouragement to him in a way that only a mother could. And that was the first time I've ever been like, oh yeah, my mom would do, like, you know, that's a total mom move right there. Like, you know, so I really, again, encourage you, if you're interested, and just obviously there's no like biblical record of that ever happening, but you're like, that could have happened. That's a cool
positive
choice.
she at one point, right before he got up to give a sermon, like licked her thumb and got something off his face.
Yeah.
He's like, Ma, you're embarrassing me.
You said all Jesus's disciples, Mary had the most reason to fall away from him.
Yeah.
Why do you think so?
Again, I think this goes back, and I could be wrong. That's just my take, but I think she's technically was with him the longest of anyone could possibly be. Like, she was there while he was like growing in her womb. So she's at the very least got 9 months on any other person who claims to follow Jesus. But I think she had to face all of this bewilderment of her fully human, fully divine son, and all the stuff that she went through that we've talked about already. She had to face all of that over and over again. And then the undoubtedly the doubts and the questions and the fears, I mean, all of his disciples faced when it came to like, wait, you're going to die in Jerusalem? What are you talking about? And they struggled with that. She had to struggle with it more. That's how I see it. So we know she didn't fall away, but I would not blame her for being among the people of Nazareth saying like, you are the Messiah, this carpenter's son.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, she saw him, she knew him when he was a kid, when he was knucklehead. I don't know. Like, imagine like one of your boys, imagine Milo, someone tells you, actually, he is the one, he will be the emperor of the universe one day. You'd be like, him? Yeah. So that's like, I mean, I don't know. That's
my money's on Lane anyway.
Yeah, right. Man. Yeah. I don't know about that.
Anyway, so all that to say, we don't have any reason to think that she did question or did doubt or did fall away ever, but she definitely had plenty of reasons to.
Yeah.
That's my take. Sense. That's my perspective. And so the fact that she's one of the only people standing there at the cross as everyone else is running and hiding or denying Jesus or selling him out to the Pharisees or whatever, those are all of his other followers. The fact that she's still there says a lot.
Do you guys think that when she saw Jesus, she saw her son or she saw God?
That's a great question. I don't know. I guess that's the line I'm trying to find. It's clear when he's lost at the temple, she sees her son. She's looking for her son.
Right.
It sounds like at the wedding, she sees her son, but she knows he could do some stuff because he's God.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if she saw both at all times or if there was a point at which it kind of flipped in her mind and she realized he really was divine.
Like, I wonder if she had her own dreams for him. You know, like I imagine, I mean, every parent has like dreams or like aspirations for their child. I wonder if she had that or if she was like, well, I was told these things by this angel and it's kind of out of my hands. But sometimes I wonder, like, did Jesus ever like disobey or disappoint or, make poor choices that he has to live with? Like, I think of my kids, like, yeah, they're disobedient sometimes. They put their parents through the ringer. Or was she like, well, he said he had to be at his father's temple. So he's a young kid. Most kids don't know what they're talking about, but he's God. So I guess we're all good here,
I was wondering, even as we were just talking about that story, like you have hundreds of stories about the things your kids have said.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get to hear those stories here on this podcast. I wonder if the person who's putting this down in the scriptures is like, oh my gosh, we have to remember that one cute thing Jesus said about needing to be in his father's house.
Yeah. Well, it did say Mary, stored all these things in her heart.
Right,
That was her.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question. The big question for me is, what did it look like for Jesus to either become aware of or to step into his full nature as the Son of God?
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that theologians and philosophers have talked about forever. Because there's all these different schools of thought about it. Like there are traditions, they're not biblical, but there are certain traditions and some writings that have Jesus like as like a little toddler doing magic tricks. Basically, he's turning clay pigeons into real birds and like weird stuff like that, because he's like basically this like divine magician person thing. And it's like, maybe, probably not.
Yeah.
But then there's also like I find it very interesting kind of a tradition of Jesus essentially almost like awakening into or growing into his awareness of his godhood or of being the Son of God. And you see moments like the testing in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Rather than thinking of it in terms of, well, of course he's Jesus, so of course he's not going to give in to the evil one. If you think of it in terms of him awakening to who he really is and who his true identity is, like that's actually a very high tension moment where things are on the line, where he could choose to go down the route of what everyone expected of the Messiah, this military dictator that was going to come in and defeat all the enemies. But instead he goes the other way and he chooses humility. He chooses obedience to his father, like those kinds of things. It's this potentially this awakening or this growing into his full nature. And if that was happening, then Mary was also awakening into or growing into a realization of what that meant.
Yeah.
Or he was magic baby. I don't know. Like one of the two.
Or I'm going to offer a third option. Maybe.
Go for it.
Maybe it's not a third option. I feel like we're this is going to sound cheesy. Like we're closer to God when we're young because there are fewer things that like inhibit us.
Yeah.
And then we tend to kind of like become disillusioned by things that we see in the world, and we kind of lose that closeness. I wonder if Jesus just never lost that. If he did come into the world with a sense of the nearness of his father and the reality of his father, and then unlike the rest of us who kind of get hardened by disappointments and things that we see, he just never lost that closeness and only grew even closer to the Father, to the point where he's a kid and he knows, oh, that's my Father's house. The temple, that's my Father's house.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. It's such a fascinating thing to consider. And plenty of church councils have gotten very wound up about exactly how this all worked. But
Maren, all right. So what does all this have to do with us? You are a mother, so you probably received this message differently.
I did, especially at
than us.
11. At 9:15, it was okay because my kids weren't in the room.
Yeah,
But
but you've
then
got
at
adult
11,
children who
oof.
possibly sometimes feel like they're slipping through your fingers a little bit. What did you hear? How did you receive this?
I'm curious, first of all,
How's your heart?
how did it strike you guys in any way that I chose to make that one of the application points? Because it wasn't necessarily obvious that that's where I should go, but I felt kind of a nudge from the Spirit to do it. But I'm curious if you guys expected that or not as the message was going along.
No, I don't think I expected it. I'm glad that you did go there.
Yeah.
That was one of the ways that you could make a message like this very practical to people in unique stages of life who are experiencing similar things.
Sure.
I'm glad that you did, but no, I don't think I expected you to go there.
Yeah, I didn't either. I am also glad you did, but I expected the let's focus on her faith and her surrender and submission, but I didn't expect the the part where it's like, here's for the parents who children may sometimes feel like they're slipping through your fingers a little bit. Like, here's some encouragement for you. So, Maren, the floor is yours. How did you receive the message?
I feel like it is a seed that was planted that is still like sinking down and down and down into my heart. Y'all know me. I'm a worrier, and the moment both my kids could drive, the worry just is nonstop until the cars are parked in front of the house and I know that they're home, and it's just something I'm probably going to struggle with forever.
Yeah.
Even after they like leave my house, like I have always worried.
They're never
Especially with all those large metallic objects flying at them every time they leave.
What?
Cars, trucks, buses.
Oh, stop. Oh, no, Desi already has her own like dishware. She's ready to go.
Oh, she's ready to get out?
She does.
She got her own
She has a
dishes?
whole corner of the garage that's just like, when I get out of here, I'm taking all of this with me. No, the letting go it's just really hard. It's almost impossible to describe. Jaden goes out with his friends every Sunday night. It's like a ritual, something that they do. And I cannot rest until he is home.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But I know in order to be a healthy living person, I have to let go for his sake, for my sake. And it's not like I'm texting him like, when are you going to be home? It's just that inwardly I can't really relax until I know everybody is where they belong and everybody is safe and everything is
picturing
good.
the classic, like he comes in late at night, the lights are all out in the house, he opens the front door and you're just sitting in the living room, just like waiting for that door to open.
The other day, I think we were both coming home, maybe even from here, but it was super foggy. Like visibility was really bad.
Yeah.
And I just, I'm living with bated breath until I know that both kids are home safe and whatever. But I also know full well that we are not promised that we will live a life free of tragedy.
Yeah.
And so if a worst case scenario rolls up onto my shores, how will I handle it? How will God help me through it? How will I sense his nearness and his presence as I can remind myself on an intellectual level that they are not mine to keep and that we live in a broken world and anything can happen. I know that on an intellectual level. I don't ever want to feel the reality of that.
Sure.
On a gut level.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's something that I'm working through as a parent of adult kids. Not everybody has the same degree of worry that I have. Some parents are like, great, get them out of the house.
Yeah. Right.
I don't like that I carry this burden of worry. And I'm learning to turn it over and trust God.
Sure.
This sermon obviously made me think of my own mom, and we have a good relationship, but I'm sure she's felt me slipping through her fingers like throughout her life, and I'm sure she longs for the closeness she had when I was younger, and we've certainly had our ups and downs, but there isn't anyone on this planet who would come to my defense faster than my mom. She, hasn't understood some of the choices I've made throughout my life, including maybe even working in ministry and the hardship that comes with that sometimes. But she supports me, and so I'm grateful that she's found a way to believe in me and walk even in her confusion, which I think was one of the talking points, is like even in Mary's confusion of what this is all about, she was submitted and surrendered to supporting and following her son.
Yeah, I even asked myself, could I be there at the foot of the cross and watch my son suffer?
Wow.
I don't think I can answer that. I don't know that I could.
Yeah, I think I can answer that. There's no way.
On one hand, there's no way, but on the other hand, where else could I possibly be?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
If I had any kind of awareness that my son was suffering, and
That's true.
would I not be there?
Right.
That's true.
Even that is just such a powerful portrayal of who she was and why she's so significant in Christendom.
That's right. Yeah, I was thinking about my mom too. Obviously, I mentioned in the message briefly how she felt when I was kind of falling away in college and was going through my really dark phase. But what I didn't talk about was, from her perspective, I called her last week just to kind of, make sure I got all the details right. And she was like, "Oh, that time? That's nothing. What I'm really dealing with is you being a pastor." Like,
Wow.
it's been way harder for me to be a pastor than it ever was for me to have that little moment of.
That surprises me. I would have thought she would have said, "Oh, that time in college, what was way harder was when you were in Kenya and you were all over the world and marching through jungles with your machete."
Nope. Well, I'm sure there was a part of it, but no, I think that season of life, it was like,
I'm going to stab myself with a machete and then I will die.
I would worry.
that season of my life, they did worry. Have I told you the story? All right. Sorry. It's a side effect. There was a moment of worry that just reminds me. So I guess, yes, she did worry. When I was in Kenya for that year, I went on a little bus trip out to Garissa. I'm sure I've told this story before, out near the border of Somalia. Okay. It was my one big request is I need to go see a village. I was in Nairobi the whole time. I was like, I've got to go see rural Kenyan life. Like I can't spend a whole year here and never. So they sent me to rural Kenya, but rural Kenya, like in the desert. And so I went out to the desert and went on my way there. The day before we left, I got this massive stomach infection and I was so sick, but I was not about to turn down this opportunity. And so I rode the bus with this one other Kenyan guy who'd never been out to that part of the country either. And the two of us went all the way out on our own to go to this place. And I was miserable. I was physically ill. It was like 120 million degrees at night. And like the mosquito net with holes in it was like sticking to my sweating skin as I soaked through my foam pillow. Like it was miserable. And I was like barely able to get down.
It's not great.
Just get down a little bit of white rice. Like that's all I could eat.
Yeah.
And I managed to get myself to an internet cafe where I could send one email home. And the only email I sent was, "I am so sick. I feel terrible.
Oh my goodness.
Everything is awful and I hate it here." And I sent that home. And then the internet went out in the city for the next week and I couldn't send another follow.
Your mom was like, "Thanks."
Right. And so one of those nights, around the time that I was actually starting to get better, I was eating again and I was feeling okay. Around that time, my mom had this, my mom and dad were falling asleep. And then out of nowhere, my picture frame on the wall falls off the wall and hits the ground. And dad didn't see it, but mom saw it and she knew that I had just died. She knew that I had just died. So she's freaking out. She won't say anything because she doesn't want to freak my dad out. But then after a couple days, she's finally like, I have to say something. This happened. And she told the whole thing about the picture frame. And dad was like, "Yeah, I threw my pillow over there and knocked the frame off the wall."
Oh my goodness.
Sorry about that.
She knew you were dead.
Anyway, so maybe after that, the rest of my travels were not really that big of a
Not
deal.
that big of a deal. Okay, so if you could crystallize it, how would you say that we can model Mary's faith in our own lives?
Well, I mean, the big takeaway that I had at the end, I think, is an answer to that, which is that we can trust, follow, believe in Christ, even when we don't have all of the ducks in a row and all the answers and all the clarity that we want. Like, we have plenty of questions, but you can follow without all the answers. That's kind of one takeaway. And so for people who, like me, are relatively skeptical, have a lot of questions, would love it if things were really clear, crystal clear and spelled out, there is a way to believe and trust and follow and to find the life that comes with that, even when you haven't nailed it all down.
Yeah.
So that's one big takeaway.
Yeah. So that's how you ended the sermon. You asked a couple of questions like, what if you chose to surrender your life to Christ without all the answers? Why was it important to end the sermon this way? It kind of felt like you kind of bookended it, Hail Mary, and then Hail Mary at the very end. That was kind of cool. But why did you choose to kind of say, even if you have questions, like it's okay and you should have faith anyways?
My experience has been that the answers or the beginnings of answers don't come before the journey, they come on the journey. In other words, so much of the mystery of what God is doing in the world has become at least somewhat clear to me, or at least visible to me by following him to see where he's moving. If I had just sat at home and waited to be told or to have it proven to me what God was doing in the world, I don't know that I would believe. I don't know that I ever would have seen those things enough to have that build into my faith today. But because I chose to follow despite my questions, I have had the privilege of seeing how God is working in all these different places, to experience all these things, to experience the Spirit moving, and all of those things then build my faith. I still have questions. I may even have more questions than I did before, but now I can look back, I can see God's faithfulness in my life. I can see the ways that he showed up to me, through me, in the lives of other Christ followers. And that to me helps to build a foundation of faith that does not require like the perfect clarity of all the answers.
Yeah.
So that's been my own experience, and that's why I feel like it's important. So many people are hindered by the questions, and so they don't ever take a step. And that's not the way to experience the answers.
What about you, Maren? Why do you think it's important to have faith even if you don't have all the answers?
Is this a different question than the one you just asked, Barry?
No. Well, he ended the sermon that way.
That's right.
So why, like in your experience, I know you've had faith in despite some really hard circumstances, despite not having answers. Why do you feel like it's okay to embrace Jesus despite not having all the answers to your questions, you know?
He is divine. I am not. He's infinite. I'm finite. I never felt like I could or should have all the answers. I always ask him for them. I'd love to have some. But I don't think that I think I know my place in the universe. I don't think that I am owed an explanation of all things. I think there would be no need for faith if that were even a possibility. So then what is faith? I thought you were asking, Barry, that's why I asked you a question about kind of what we're learning from Mary, or why. What's the big takeaway from having a sermon about Mary?
Sure.
I'm asking myself why she was called blessed, or why even in her song she calls herself blessed, right? Henceforth, all generations will call me blessed. Well, we just talked about like the hardship of Mary and some of the trauma that she endured. Why would all generations call her blessed? Why would she say that of herself? And I think maybe part of the answer is just a couple verses before that. And I said this in my prayer at the end of service yesterday. You gave this wonderful message about Mary. The worship team closed with the song Promises, which I'm not even sure they did this on purpose, but right ahead of Mary's song, she is hanging out with her cousin Elizabeth. Elizabeth is pregnant with John the Baptist. Mary is pregnant with Jesus. And Elizabeth says to Mary, "Blessed is she who has believed, for there will be a fulfillment of those things which were told her from the Lord." Another translation says, "Blessed is she who has believed that the Lord will fulfill all of his promises to her."
New King James.
That was New King James. Maybe that's why she was blessed. In the midst of the trauma and the having to let go of her son and watch him live a life that she probably never imagined, and say things that she at least would have known would cost him his life. Despite all of that, at least according to Elizabeth, Mary believed in her heart that God would fulfill all of the promises that he made to her. Read Mary's song when you get a chance. It's Luke chapter 1, and it starts down in verse 46. The things that Mary held on to, my soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoiced in God my Savior, for he's regarded the lowly estate of his maidservant. She knew her place in the universe.
Yeah.
She knew how lowly she was, and yet God saw her and chose her and essentially anointed her to be the mother of the Lord Jesus. Why was she blessed? Because she believed that the Lord saw her and that he was near to her and that he would keep his promises to her. So that's my takeaway from this.
Yeah.
Even when it's bleak, even when I don't have all of the answers, know that he is near. Cling to him like Mary did. Even in the face of disaster, even at the foot of the cross, cling to him like Mary did.
Yeah, that's something. I mean, I have been a person that likes having the answers. So having faith without having answers has been a challenge throughout my life, and so that's why I asked the question: why has it been important to you, or how have you experienced this? Because for me, it's been harder to just have a blind faith. But this person, Mary, is just inspirational in that way. Like, she was probably confused a lot of the time, and she had faith anyways. She was probably, blindsided some of the time, and she had faith anyways. And so, yeah, that's why I asked the question. Where do we go next? What are we doing?
All right. Well, we are going to the passage later in Luke where Jesus sends out the 72 disciples to kind of be messengers that the kingdom of God is at hand. That's Jesus's message. And so he sends out his disciples to do that. And as he sends them to go, he gives them some very unique marching orders, which we'll look at. He says, don't take any extra provisions. Don't take a bag, just go. And I want us to just think about what it is that Jesus is inviting his disciples to do, because we'll get into this.
That seems unreasonable.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And yet they come back rejoicing. So what is it at the core of his message here? And we'll look at the world of the text and talk about how, at least in Luke and Acts, Luke's 2-part series, how this theme of John the Baptist being sent into the wilderness to prepare the way for the Lord, the 12 disciples being sent to prepare the way for Jesus, the 72 being sent, and then in Acts, the apostles and the entire church being sent into all the world, how this places us in the midst of a grand mission of the gospel, of the good news being declared. Cool. So it'll be interesting. I don't exactly know where I'm going to land with it.
Yeah,
but
not yet.
We'll find out.
Not until Wednesday at 5.
Until Wednesday at 4:20 when I have to start working on the app notes.
Yeah. Actually, I need to say that we're not going to be here next week. No pod next week.
Oh,
right. Because we've got a lead team retreat. We're going to be on our lead
team retreat.
Yeah,
I almost forgot to say that. So, no pod next week, and Barry's thinking.
No, we will have a pod the following week.
Yeah,
right?
pod the following
week.
Will
we double up? Will we talk about both messages the following week?
Whoa, double pod?
Whoa.
Wow.
Probably. Now that you've said it, we probably have to do it. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. And Marin, will you please send us out?
I will. Do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God.
And we'll see you on the other side of Sunday.